Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good lunch. I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. Sharice, if you wouldn't mind calling roll again.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, I went to the wrong one. Dr. Raggio?
Here.
Ms. Kaiser? Mr. Borges?
Here.
Ms. Chang?
Here.
Ms. Dominguez?
Here.
Dr. Valdez?
Here.
Dr. White?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move along to agenda item 6, Board Chair's Report. The first thing I'd like to do is look at the calendar for the rest of this year. As you can see, it's on page 1. It shows that our next meeting, which is scheduled for April 27th, 28th, was designed to be a in-person, face-to-face meeting in Sacramento. It may still be the case, but we want to mention that it may end up being a teleconference also, so you're prepared for that. And we'll let you know as soon as possible the status of that. Next thing I want to talk about are the board committees, and there's been a few updates. So what I'll ask you to do is look at page 2 and 3 that looks at the standing committees and look at where you have been assigned. Some of you haven't changed anything, and others of you have. As Todd mentioned, we don't need to have as many hearing aid dispensers practice committee. I'm sorry, maybe that's the hearing aid dispensing committee. We've added the hearing aid dispensers practice committee. Is that right, Paul?
That's correct.
I would have to say yes, since I apparently am a chair of that too.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. That's correct.
Okay.
I guess I was in the restroom at the time when we were voting for who was going to be chair for that.
Would you mind, Paul, explaining to us why we now have these 2 designations for committees on hearing aids?
Yes. Yeah, so as you all recall, previously there was a statutory requirement to have a hearing aid dispensers practice committee. One of the problems we were running into is that most of the board members were on that committee, and we were restricted, or we were running the risk at many times, and a few times we actually had occasions where we didn't have a quorum. So that committee couldn't take action, could only have discussions. We went to the legislature and during our sunset process and explained our need to actually give the committee more success by actually having a smaller group. So what we have now is something similar to what we have with the SLPs and the audiologists. We have a practice committee that's going to exist just for hearing aid dispensers. And then we also have a broad committee, which is going to deal with hearing aid dispensing issues. Because as you all know, audiologists are also hearing aid dispensers. So we want to make sure that we can address the general broad hearing aid dispensing issues as a committee, but that we could also focus in on those issues that are specific to hearing aid dispensers in the practice committee. Hope that's clear for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. With the vacancy left by Debbie Snow, we've put Gilda Dominguez in as the chair of the Enforcement and Ad Hoc Committee. Sunset Review is a bit dormant at this time, but we keep it on the books anyway. Legislative Committee is now Karen Chang and Gilda Dominguez. Otherwise, I think pretty much everything stayed the same. So are there any comments or concerns about the board assignments or the committee assignments? Not seeing any. Okay. So the next aspect of our board chair report is to report on the what happened at the Audiology Practice Committee this morning. And as you know, we talked about 2 lengthy topics, so I'm not going to reiterate everything about them. But the take-home message is that the staff is going to work with DCA Regulations Council to draft language that will clarify the scope of practice and supervision for audiology aids, as well as implement statutory changes. Essentially, we looked at the 2015 recommendations that you saw in Appendix B that looked at the kind of activities that would require supervision and those that were really considered out of the scope of practice for an audiology aid. We added a couple of things to that. The staff will, at this point, be working to research the idea of why industrial aids have to be involved in the language, and if that's possible to remove that. We talked about the possibility of asking that when it's a fragile patient and a complex case, that there always be supervision for that, immediate supervision, but that more all supervision is over the shoulder for 90 days as a possibility. We talked about making sure there's a clear distinction in the language between performing a task and interpreting that task. We talked about having a sample plan available so that those applying for their audiology aids would have a template to help guide their descriptions of what they're going to have their aid be doing. Staff will be looking at SLIPA regulations and provisions to see if there's any issue, such as the one that was brought up by Charisse, that if a new task is introduced at some later point, that they would have adequate training and over-the-shoulder supervision for that kind of new endeavor until it was mastered. So that was primarily what we're going to do. The staff will be working on kind of hammering this out, likely incorporating the list from 2015. The other discussion was on the 12-month RPE, and we were able to talk to a number of the AUD directors and clinical directors to help clarify what they feel their needs are and make sure that is compatible with what the legislative needs are and have been historically. So essentially the notions were that we wouldn't be asking for hours beyond the 300 that are already stipulated, but they would be counting the time, and the consensus for that time is that it be 12 consecutive months post-didactic. So that essentially that's going to stay the way it was. We talked about making sure we define how many hours a week is a full-time. And right now it says 30 plus hours per week, but we'll be talking about that. So I think there are many elements that we're going to be talking about here that will require quite a bit more work, I would say, on behalf of the committee and the staff to kind of iron out the language. But as it turned out, kind of to my surprise, there were not as many changes as I had anticipated, and that we really, for the most part, we're on the same page about many things. So that's the plan for that. Can I ask Mr. Borges to give us an update on the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee meeting?
Sure. We just had one item. We were reviewing language that was being changed for the hearing aid dispensers training and temporary license supervision. And that language was approved to go before the full board for approval.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask if there's any board discussion on these reports or on the committee assignments as well. Holly?
Yes, I just have to say I was so impressed with the discussion where the university faculty worked together to summarize in response to the survey. I just thought it was just one of the best discussions I've heard. So I was very impressed with that.
Thank you. I think they were very helpful, and I knew they would be, but they really clarified some things I truly didn't understand, and as to how they answered the survey the way they did. It makes much more sense to me now, now that I talked to them. Any other board discussion on the board reports or the committee assignments? Holly, I think your hand is still up unless you have another question. Okay, seeing no further requests for discussion from the board, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment, please.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, agenda item 7 is the executive officer's report.
Thank you, Dr. Rajo. Okay, I'll go right into my report. My report was included in the hand carry items, so it would have been just sent to you. And I'll just go over, bear with me here as I find my place. We wanted to announce that during the business modernization project, we had to move a staff person to serve as the board's subject matter expert. That person was Tim Yang. Tim is an enforcement analyst, but his extensive knowledge in licensing and enforcement made him the perfect person for that job, and you know that's resulted in some great successes with our project. One of our goals was to fill behind him and to get a person to come in and work as an enforcement analyst position in an intermittent role. And we were able to fill that position to address our investigative caseload and handle intake and workload distribution. So at this time, all of our vacancies are filled in the office. I also wanted to just mention that we continue to attempt to provide outreach, and just recently we had the opportunity to talk to the San Francisco State Audiology Association on the importance of licensing. These are students at different stages. We also recorded the presentation for those students that could not attend and that were in class at the time. The presentation included an overview of the board. We talk about the importance of licensing. We talk about enforcement, and Dr. Rajo was also in attendance. And this time around, we were able to actually provide them with a demonstration of the board's online licensing system, because they will probably be one of the first groups to really fully benefit from that, from it completely being up and running.
Can I just add that Paul and Charisse allowed this to be videotaped, since not all students could attend at that time. And my understanding is has had wide distribution since then, and students are extremely grateful.
Thank you. That's great to hear. And I have to say, I'm impressed with just the questions that they ask and their interest. I mean, it's reassuring to see young people that actually understand the importance of licensure and what they're getting into. Moving on to our budget report, I wanted to just mention that at this time, we don't have the normal expenditure projection report to review that we have normally provided. One of the reasons is that we need to look at more detailed projections before we submit a complete report to the board. So we're actually at this time working with budgets to track this information for our own planning purposes and to see where we are in the budget. One area that has affected our budget is all the work that we're doing with business modernization and the growth of our board staff. So because of that, we are probably going to have to look at some tightening of our budget, something that we haven't had to do as much in the past. But I think it's really important that we exercise caution and that we look at our own expenditures and do those things that are absolutely necessary to ensure that we come out in the black with our budget at the end of this year. That could also impact our board meeting travel. As Dr. Rajo mentioned earlier, we were planning to have a in-person board meeting in April. There's a possibility that we may have to go to a teleconference board meeting. The drawback on that obviously is that we don't all get to see each other and have that in-person interaction. There is some benefit, and that is that we do get good participation in these online meetings. But I will keep you posted. If you're interested in that expenditure projection report, we expect to have something probably solid in a few weeks. So you can let me know and I can send something to each of you that are interested in seeing that. What we have included in your budget materials is the board's fund condition. And the fund condition is just a snapshot for you to see where the board is, in our fund. And it's somewhat of a balance sheet. So you can see the beginning balance that we start with. If you're looking at that fund condition, you can see the revenues and transfers, the money that comes in. And for this current year, you can see the total revenues are projected to be 3.1 million, and our expenditures, we usually show on the balance sheet that we're expending the total fund. Normally we don't. So whatever we don't spend that we project to spend goes into our savings account. And that's the fund balance at the bottom of the document. What's different this year is that we are actually probably going to expend most of our budget. So that's something that I think we have to look at. But the good news is, and what this document does tell you, is that the months in reserve is stable. So with the changes that we've made in our fee structure, now we have stability for the next few years in our fund condition. And that's something that we have been tackling for years. One of the first things that I noticed in coming on as the executive officer of the board, that we had to have that fiscal stability, and we now have that. Are there any questions on the report that I have so far before I move forward?
Hi, Paul. I have a question. It's Karen.
Yes.
Do you anticipate us digging into our savings?
That there is always a possibility. For instance, at mid-year, sometimes we will project that we need additional money for enforcement, or if we actually exceed our budget, we could look to get an additional augmentation to our budget. At this time, I think it's premature to say, but it's always a possibility. And we're not talking about a great deal of money that would have an impact, that would have a significant impact on our fund balance.
Okay. My other question is, when I was working for the state, our big thing was we cannot go past, I mean, maybe your department is different, but we cannot go past a certain amount, whatever amount was allotted for us. And whatever we don't use, it's basically use it or lose it. So I'm kind of surprised that says that DCA gives you a savings account so you can save for
Yes, the structure of our fund is a little bit different, and I think that when we don't use our budget, it goes into a reversion mode back into our fund reserve. and that's because we're a special funded agency. So this is money that, you know, the board can use at a later time for future budgets. So it rolls over into the next budget because we're
Okay.
funded by licensing fees. But you are
Oh,
correct.
okay.
We are allotted a certain amount of money, and we are expected to stick with that budget. That is the whole purpose of having the budget. So
Okay.
that is correct.
Okay. Got it.
And
Did I
I
hear
would
someone
clar-
else with a question?
it was me. No, it was me.
Okay.
I was just going to clarify, you know, while the fund is your savings account, you have to go through the Department of Finance and the appropriate channels, either through augmentations allowed through statutory provisions or yeah, as you essentially have to go to the legislature and the Department of Finance to get additional augmentations to your budget. So you do have to stick within your budget except for certain specified augmentations. And so that's where the budget could be increased and it would come out of the fund, but it's not like we can just choose to dip into our savings or
Okay.
fund. So
Okay.
it's a little different than a regular person's budget. But yes, see, each year we get appropriated a certain amount. That's our budget. All of that money comes from our fund, which is kind of like a savings account. So all those application licensing fees, they all go into the fund. And every year our budget that we are allotted by the legislature and the governor, that money is from the fund and given to us, and we have to stay within it. And there are some ways in which you can get augmentations if needed for specified things. But that's the only way you can dip into the savings, essentially,
Okay.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Sharice. A good example of that is when we do a budget change proposal to augment our staff or our fund. That's done. That's done. The planning is years in advance, a couple years in advance, because we have to go through the whole budget process. So yes, I don't want to give the impression that, you know, we can just withdraw from savings. Their process is to actually get augmentations or to augment our budget. And it's usually done in future years through the budget process.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to section 3 of my report, we have our regulations report. And what this does is this gives you a status of all of the rulemaking files that the board is working on. As you know, we're going to have a separate detailed report where we'll go in depth and talk about the specific rulemaking files that we're working on, making changes on, or need board approval to move forward with. But this kind of lists all the rulemaking files that we have, what the final filing date is, status, and any additional comments that our regulation staff has included there. Moving on to section E of my report, I want to talk about licensing. This is very important part of my report. Before I go into that, I do want to point out that we include a statistical report that shows you our licensing growth, and it also shows you the number of licensees that we have, the number of applications that we take every year. And one thing that you'll note if you take a look at that is that the number of applications and licenses that we issue has significantly grown. When I used to give presentations, I used to tell people we are licensing almost 3,500 people. Well, last year we licensed about 4,300 people, and this year we're on pace to license 4,500 licensees in 1 year. So there is significant growth in our workload. There's significant growth with our licensing population, and that's why we are taking on the important work of our business modernization, because we have to license people in a way and in a manner that's more efficient and doesn't drain as many resources. As you know, and as I've mentioned in the past, a board of our size to take on a project of such magnitude, it's actually not very common. Usually these are projects that are taken on by much larger departments. We have a staff of, you know, about 13, 14 people, and it's quite an undertaking. So I have a report that follows this where we're going to talk about business modernization, and I'll share all the good news that we have with this. The good news that we've launched all our application types at this point, and they're all available through our online system. There are still troubleshooting issues that we have to work through, and we're developing at the same time additional application status lookup features. Um, doing doing this project on such a short timeline has, comes with a price. So as I've mentioned, it's a huge undertaking for our board staff. Some of our staff have had to make great sacrifices, staying on task with their project assignments while completing their everyday duties. I just want to, I'm afraid to mention anyone's name because I don't want to miss out on anyone. But I will say that, Cherise has been a great part of our leadership in making this happen. And Tim Yang, they both put in a great amount of work, and all of the licensing staff that has contributed. I walk through the offices at times and I see them testing. I see them trying to do their work while they're also trying to deal with IT staff. So they should all be commended, because to get this project done in such a short amount of time is quite an accomplishment. So we have gotten to that point, and now we get to the price to pay. The price to pay is in the extra workload and the backlog. So if you look at my licensing report, look at the licensing cycle times, you can actually see the cost. We are currently at about 12 weeks at completing. It's taking us 12 weeks to complete the applications that are complete today. And it takes us about 9 weeks to look at supporting documents. So there's a significant increase in our cycle times. We expect that as we deal with some of the backlog paper applications and we become better at doing the online applications, this number is going to go down. So in the long term, we're going to see a lot of progress there. Going to our practical examination report, we had an examination that we conducted on November 18th and 19th. Again, this is, our staff continued to do all the work that needs to get done, like putting on an examination. To do a practical exam, you have to have examiners, you have to have subject matter experts, you have to be planning, you have to get the facilities ready, have the staff ready, and they all do this on their own. They're dedicated. They come in on the weekends to make this happen. So we have our exam results from November of 22, and you can see the pass and fail rates. We also conducted an exam on January 27th and 28th, and those results we expect to have at our April board meeting. Moving on to our enforcement report, you also have in your materials enforcement statistical information. We're still receiving a relatively lower number of complaints from previous years. We're starting to see just a slight uptick, but it's still relatively low based on other historical data. But I've included statistical information on enforcement, as well as the disciplinary actions that have been adopted by the board during the last 12 months. At this time, are there any questions from any of our board members on my report? Thank you.
Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any other board discussion or questions about Paul's report. So can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause for a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the report, Paul. Agenda item 8, update on the board's business modernization project and releases of online applications for licensure. I believe Paul and Cherise will lead this discussion.
Yes, I'll go ahead and just start and just give everyone a bit of a background. And I apologize if I'm repetitive in anything that I said earlier, but I do want to cover this um, introductory information. So again, this is an update on the board's business modernization project, and we want to discuss our upcoming releases for our online applications. Um, as I mentioned, we have been able to launch all the remaining applications for licensure with the final with our release date of February 10th. This means that every license type can now apply online. So whether you're a speech language pathologist, audiologist, RPE, hearing aid dispensing, they can all apply online now. There is one final phase of the project, and that allows us to create an application status lookup page. This is a fourth phase of our project, and what this means for us is not having to answer phone calls on what's my status, or being bombarded with phone calls or emails, especially during our peak period. So ideally, this would be a self-service feature where someone could just go on and check the application status as many times as they want. We've also created our Apply Simply page on our board website, along with the icon that's available. We've been able to make all these process improvements, and while developing this, we've actually stopped to make process improvements, and these are going to benefit our board staff, our stakeholders, and our applicants. And what I mean by that is these may not have been originally planned for, but with everyone's input and hard work, we were able to make more improvements that are going to save time and allow us to have a good long-term impact on the system. So at this time, I just want to mention one other thing, and then I'll let Charisse talk about anything else she wants to cover and talk about the releases. But we have already been able to do demos to different groups, to program directors, to actual potential applicants, and those demonstrations have gone fairly well. It's pretty impressive when you see it work behind the scenes and when you see what's happening. So Charisse, anything else you want to add on this?
I just want to follow up on Paul's shout out to, the licensing team is 4 people that process, 4,400 applications a year. And on top of doing that, they've been developing, being subject matter experts, helping with testing with Tim Yang and I to get these applications not only into an online system, but also not doing a cookie cutter process. These online applications are customized to the application type. They really are meant to be a full service application where everything, as much as possible, can be done online for the applicant, their supervisors, for training program directors, et cetera. This is, as one IT member said, it really is the program, our board, meeting the technology and coming up with the best customized solutions that we can. Of course, there's been bumps along the way. You're flying the plane while you're building it, and that does mean those higher processing time frames. It gives my staff and I much heartburn, and we're working hard and many extra hours to reduce that, while also putting all the finishing touches, troubleshooting, and then there's always, you cannot anticipate everything with testing, and so we did find a few bumps along the way about people getting stuck at signature because they didn't know that the circling diagram that was circling on their screen meant the e-signature was coming, and instead they clicked away and they went away from their application. And because our applications are custom, it took us some time to figure out the correct custom solution to get them back to sign their application. And a variety of different other technical difficulties. So you can test a lot, but unless you want to do a very elongated, much longer process with focus groups, then it would have been a year before we even saw these applications, another year. This is kind of the the prices we've paid. So we did have some technical difficulties. We're still working through them. We troubleshoot issues as they come up every week. Sometimes it's an easy solution. Sometimes it takes more work and effort. And the first few tries don't work out. And we finally find this solution and everybody gets through. Unfortunately, that does happen. But I do think we're going to see a lot of improvements in the coming months as it's easier to process, as everything is online. It's and as it makes it faster and easier for applicants and also for staff when they're processing it. And then phase 4, where they are going to be building a page or portal essentially on our website where the applicant can go ahead and put in personal identifying information, so only information they would know, and it would bring up any application they've had with the board and then show the status and the codes that are in there. Maybe it says that it's transcript is still pending. We haven't received it. So that way the applicant knows, oh, that's what's holding it up or something like that. So I think once all 4 phases and everything is completed, we're going to see a significant improvement for all parties. But it's been quite an interesting go and a lot of hours, a lot of pain, and a lot of testing. I can vouch for staff have worked quite a few hours, and we've had quite a few even late night sessions trying to test and get these things going. So kudos to my amazing staff. They are the small but mighty team and really making the best of this business modernization project. Couldn't be prouder of them.
Long time coming and a lot of work. And I know the professional community is and will really appreciate this. Are there any other board questions or discussion about the business modernization project or the online application? I have one question. Paul mentioned that they are doing demonstrations, and I was just wondering how you do those and to whom. How could you sign up for one?
Currently, we've been doing them upon request, and we have, I think, 2 requests from SLIPA programs that should be coming up that we need to get to. Anybody can request it to the board, and we will work together to get that going for faculty, students, student associations. We originally had not planned to make video demos of the application process, but if we do feel like after a while it's necessary and not just more of a preview, that is a potential thing that DCA, the communications division, can help us with, I believe. They can work with us on doing a videotaped session as well.
Who would pay for that?
Oh, it comes out of our pro rata, as far as I know. I don't think it's a fee, a billed per service. And usually I'm the one demonstrating it.
When you say that you ask the board, how do you ask the board for a demo? In what vein?
You can email us at speechandhearing@dca.ca.gov, and then staff will initiate the process of scheduling, usually with me, because I'm usually the demoer, for lack of a better word.
It's virtual, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, any other board discussion or questions? Not seeing any, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel? Oh, actually, I apologize. We do have one request from Joe Bartlett. And Joe, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
I was, needed to run to my phone. I wanted to just comment. I actually had just recently the opportunity to start with a trainee when it comes to this process you're describing, using the online one. And all the trainees I've done in the past have been, filling out the paperwork and sending it in. It did seem it was much smoother. So I really want to say thank you for getting to this point because, it's sometimes it's hard enough to get through the process, and some people don't like getting any obstacles, but this definitely takes away a few to where it gets right to the point. And even the online signatures are very helpful for that. So I just wanted to make a comment that's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, this is the moderator. Looks like there's no other requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action to revise the board's administrative procedural manual. And I believe Sharice is going to provide some information to the board.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Raggio. So as you may recall, the board last year started the review process for the board's administrative procedure manual. It hadn't been updated since 2016. So we were taking a look at it, and on page 1 of the memo, you can see in bullets the items that the board asked to be updated, some grammatical, some formatting, and some substantive changes. And then at the October board meeting, the board asked for additional time to review the changes in order to, it's quite a lengthy document, to review it further. One of the big changes that we would note is making sure that the one vote hold is correctly noted in both sections. We had a little snafu where one section said it was 1 and one section said it was 2, but it is a one vote hold when asking to hold a enforcement case for discussion. And so the rest is all noted. It's highlighted as well as crossed through. So those are all changes made. And then we also made sure to double back and check with legal and others about the legal requirements and sections. And it is ready for your review and approval or additional edits if anyone has any.
I was wondering if on page 14, where we list the different committees, if we should add that new hearing aid dispenser practice committee.
Yeah, I had that in my notes too.
Yes, that would be a good addition. And I will add it and also use the same purpose as identified in the board chair's reports. And I will grab that real quick and read it. That the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee is the Hearing Aid Dispensers Practice Committee, and it addresses change in practice patterns and recommends position statements and or scope of practice amendments for consideration. And that would be in comparison to the Hearing Aid Dispensing Committee, which has the broader and both dispensing license types.
And Holly, you have your hand up?
Yes. On the overview, a thought came to me because where you describe a speech language pathologist, audiologist, and hearing aid dispensers, for the sunset review, we had updated the description of each of our professions. It's a little bit lengthier, but I was thinking it would be worth looking at to update here. Maybe it still could be more condensed than the sunset review. But anyway, that's just a comment about that first paragraph. Otherwise, I just thought it was fabulous. I've learned so much going through it. And I don't know what the process was when board members started on the board before the pandemic, because by the time I started, we weren't meeting in person. I understand that people that you used to come to Sacramento for a in-person kind of a orientation. So was that a time that somebody reviewed some of the key points in this procedure manual? Because I think it would be a really important document to go over the highlights when someone comes on the board.
Paul, would you like to address it or you want me to?
Yes, I think that we've always covered like information, and we provided this document to new board members. But I think we're always looking at, developing our training. Some of you board members have done more informal training because of all the changes that we've made. And now we're doing our training. We do our training online through Teams or through WebEx.
And it's definitely something that would be included in the board member orientation training materials. And then some of the specifics we try to cover in some of the slides, but we could always reference this document as well.
Anyway, thank you for all your work on that. And also, it's a little out of order, but I also want to thank you for the modernization project, because you guys have just worked so hard. We're really grateful to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gilda.
Yes, I agree with Holly regarding the description of the speech language pathologist scope. I think it would be beneficial to expand upon that outside of the speech or communication disorders in children and disabled adults. So I do recall giving feedback for this. So I think it would be great to look at and include as you see fit.
We'll go ahead and add that in there.
I have a couple of questions. Anybody else does? On page 10, it talks about out-of-state travel. And it talks about that board members will be reimbursed for actual lodging and so on. The last statement is that out-of-state travel for all persons representing the state of California is controlled and must be approved by the governor's office and the Department of Consumer Affairs. The number of states in which California or the governor's office will not support travel is growing. It seems every few months there's another state added to it. I don't know that we want to list states because that's going to change, but I think it might be good to note to incoming people that there are states that for which they not only will they not provide funding for travel to that state, but I believe in some cases they don't allow you to travel there on state business.
On behalf of the state.
Yeah, on behalf of the state. So I think some sort of statement
in there
about it would be a nice heads up. If you want to find out the hard way that you can't attend something, they should always check that list.
I will wordsmith something to add in that section.
On page 17, this is the board member orientation and training. It lists the documents that are provided to incoming board members. It talks about the training they have to get and so on. But I don't see that the Practice Act book is provided, and I believe it is to all board members. Did I miss that? Or because I don't see that you're discussed that it's provided.
I do not put that in there. I do send it out anytime we have a new board member. We talk about required training. Okay, here in this paragraph. Okay, so add the law book, law and regulations book. To the materials provided.
And I'm just curious here, have business cards ever been provided to a board member?
I believe so. I don't think anyone's requested them in quite a long time.
No, I would say I think we moved away from that some time ago.
What I found at my last board is they usually didn't, maybe your board chair or board president, whichever term you use at the board, they would go through the cards, but the rest of the board really didn't. And so they kind of were like, I'm not sure what to do. And they would just give them back to me when they left. And sometimes we had to get new logos on, and they hadn't even used the previous ones. So they just said, forget it. But I do know the board chair often, because of their going to more events more often to represent the board, often went through the cards. So I think that's but definitely why we went from having will be provided to can be provided, because in past experience, it really is usually the chair and maybe the vice chair that might use them at attending meetings most often. But they can be provided to everyone if they'd like to.
Okay. Another question, unless someone else does. Okay, I'm looking at Chapter 7, Complaint and Disciplinary Process. And on page, I think it overlaps 24 and 25, that talks about Office of Administrative Hearings. And I guess I want to make sure I understand the difference between if I say this correctly, a stipulation and a proposed decision. So is a proposed decision, does that occur because the person has not agreed to the stipulation and therefore it has to go to a proposed decision?
Madam Chair, this is Attorney Swenson, if I could answer that.
Mm-hmm.
A stipulation memorializes a proposed settlement between the parties in a disciplinary case. The proposed settlement embodied in the stipulation must be approved by the board. If the settlement is not approved, then the matter would proceed to hearing. A proposed decision is the decision by the administrative law judge after having heard the case and considering the evidence that's presented for board approval or disapproval. In other words, the adoption or rejection of the proposed decision. That follows an administrative hearing on the matter if the case is not settled. Not all cases are settled, and stipulations for a proposed settlement are not always presented to the board in each case. And so the case where there is a proposed stipulation for settlement that is presented to the board and that's rejected, those do go to hearing, and then there's a proposed decision that the board can either accept or reject within the time allowed by the Administrative Procedure Act.
Okay, so if I'm understanding right, a stipulation is all parties have agreed to the findings and the results, and it'll come before the board for a decision. But if they haven't agreed, then it goes to hearing. And eventually we'll get a proposed decision from the hearing.
That's correct.
All right, okay. Okay, thank you. After all this time, I've never been quite sure.
Dr. Rajo, can I add something too, just as far as the board enforcement operations go? We don't always seek a settlement. Most of the times that we do, but there are times where we don't pursue a settlement and we decide we want to go straight to hearing. And both of these are in response to the board filing an accusation or filing an accusation for a licensee or a statement of issues for an applicant.
Okay, that makes sense. I see we have the entire Bagley King language in here. Are there any other board questions or discussion on the administrative procedure manual? Not seeing any. I'd like to ask for a motion to accept these amendments, not only the staff amendments, but board suggested amendments to the board administrative procedure manual.
I move to accept the amendments.
So to accept this manual as amended?
Yes, so moved.
So
I second.
Thank you. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the table in a second, so I'd like to ask Cherise to call the vote.
Absolutely. Dr. Raju.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser.
Aye.
Mr. Borges.
Aye.
Ms. Chang.
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Dr. Valdez. Dr. White.
Aye.
And the motion carries.
Okay, thank you for that. Move on to agenda item 10, legislative report, update, review, and possible action on proposed legislation. And I believe that Heather Oliveris is going to lead this discussion.
Good afternoon, board members. Heather Olivares, the board's legislation and regulation analyst, here to give you the updates on the legislative report. Some legislative deadline just passed last week. That was on February 17th. It was the last day for bills to be introduced for this year. And the bills will start having their committee hearings in March, with the last day being May 5th for bills to be heard in the policy committee in the House of Origin. And then on May 19th is the last day for fiscal committees to hear bills introduced in the House of Origin. Then if you look in section B of your report, I have some updates on legislation that passed, one in 2021 and the rest in 2022. The first bill is AB 107, that's licensure regarding veterans and military spouses. Board staff is working with the DCA Office of Information Systems to implement changes to the board's IT systems to create temporary license codes for all applicable license types that must have a temporary license issued within 30 days for military spouses currently licensed in another state. AB 2686, which was the sunset bill from last year. As you already know, the legislative mandate for a specified membership and size of the hearing aid dispensing committee has been removed. The board chair has since appointed a standing committee related to hearing aid dispensers and another standing committee related to hearing aid dispensing. The audiologist application for applicants holding a valid American Board of Audiology certificate is available online. Board staff are also planning to develop and implement the speech language pathology and audiology aid renewal process this summer. Additionally, the requirement for applicants and licensees to provide their email address to the board becomes effective July 1, 2023, and board staff will be developing a form for applicants and licensees to change their email address on file with the board. For SB 1237, regarding licensees military service, board staff have determined that the board's current IT system does not allow for an automated process for waiving renewal fees and continuing education requirements. So instead, the board will be implementing a manual process for military licensees who qualify for a waiver of their renewal fees and their continuing ed requirements. And then finally, SB 1453 regarding the fees procedure. Board staff have received inquiries from licensees regarding a grandfathering clause for the written verification from one ENT that the speech language pathologist performed 25 supervised fees procedures, including 10 procedures supervised by a licensed physician who performs nasal endoscopy as part of their practice, and 15 procedures supervised by either a licensed physician who performs nasal endoscopy or another licensed speech language pathologist verified as competent in performing the FEAS procedure. The DCA legal office has looked at the language that was passed last year and determined that the current law does not include a grandfathering clause. And so speech language pathologists performing the FEAS procedure after January 1 of this year must have a written verification that meets the current requirements in the law, which is Business and Professions Code Section 2530.2. Additionally, board staff are aware that the American Academy of Otolaryngology and the California Medical Association have concerns regarding the recent legislative changes in SB 1453, specifically regarding expanding authority to other licensed physicians who perform nasal endoscopy to supervise speech language pathologists learning to perform the FEAS procedure. And board staff anticipate there will be additional legislative changes to address these concerns. And the spot bill has been introduced. It's SB 612, and that will be the vehicle that will be used to address these concerns. Are there any questions regarding our implementation efforts so far?
I have a question about a couple of things.
Sure.
In AB 2686, that last paragraph there talks about audiologists applying, holding a valid ABA certificate is available online. That's only for people who have a license in another state and are choosing to move and practice in California. Is that right?
Yes.
So I think it might be good, not that it matters right now, but to recognize that that's the population this is applying to.
Yes.
And my other question has to do with AB 1453. Are they, is the suggestion here in the last paragraph that there are other physicians besides ENTs who do nasal endoscopy?
Correct.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, so the concern that was raised prior to SB 1453 going into effect was that it's hard to find ENTs who are willing to do this training on the FEAS procedure. And so the goal was to open it up to other physicians that also perform nasal endoscopy as part of their normal practice.
know there were many who did that, but aside from that, so their concern is not that speech pathologists are being allowed to do this procedure. It's really they just want more types of available personnel for supervision. Is that right? And that they're not concerned about them doing the task.
The ENT group is concerned about other physicians besides ENTs doing the supervision, as well as concerned about speech language pathologists supervising the procedure.
Is there any consequence to that besides concern?
My understanding is that they are trying to get those provisions of the law changed this year.
Any other board discussion on those two items? Or on the A and B? Not seeing any, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment just on those two, on A and B.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And it does look like we have a request from Laura Wasco. And Laura, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Good afternoon, Board. Laura Wasco on behalf of the California Association of Speech and Language Hearing, otherwise known as CASHA. We appreciate the Board's collaboration and work with our association on SB 1453. We do agree with the note in the Board agenda that there have been a lot of inquiries regarding, from practicing SLPs regarding the supervision of the passing of the scope and the written verification process. CASHA's intent with the legislative changes in SB 1453 is that this provision would be prospective in nature, and we are working with the Senator on statutory clarifying changes to that point. We look forward to working with the Board on this further clarification this coming legislative session. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel? Oh, I apologize. Looks like Laura may have raised her hand again. Would you like Laura to? Oh, never mind. And it does look like we have another person who has requested public comment, Marissa. Marissa, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device. Right, Marissa, you are unmuted.
Great. So just to further clarify the last comment, current fees programs that had speech pathologists who were certified under the old regulation have had to suspend. And so is that basically going to be that all those fees programs will stay suspended until such time as the legislature has amended this? Oh, am I muted? Hello?
Does anybody know the answer to that?
Oh.
It's a statutory provision, so yes, we don't have any ability to change through our own powers the statute until it's changed with the legislature.
So this new law effectively killed multiple fees programs within the state.
These were all SLPs that didn't have 25 supervised.
No, they had 25 supervised passes. They just weren't supervised initially by ENTs for the first 10. They have
Were they-
multiple passes.
So-
They've actually been practicing under this provision for quite some time.
They'd
They are
never been
competent.
supervised by the ENT for any 10 procedures?
Yes, they have the written letter from an ENT verifying that they have had 25 passes, but they were not directly supervised for the first initial 10 as the new law is written.
So how did somebody sign the first 10, or without the first 10, how did they advance to the 25?
So as the law was written, it's a good question, because it's actually the way the language was written is that they had to have 25 passes and a letter on file from an ENT verifying that they had had 25 passes. There was nothing in the language that actually specified direct supervision of those 25 passes. And so the way that many people actually received the passage of the scope is that they took FEES courses and were supervised by a verified competent speech pathologist for the 25 passes that they had. And then an ENT signed off on those passes.
Yeah, there has to be a much better quality control.
Well, that's just the mechanics of passing a scope. That's not on the actual FEES exam itself.
Exactly.
Right.
That's where we have to work with ASHA, finding a way where there's really quality control in the way people are getting trained and certified.
Right.
I don't think there's certification at this time, and for something that involves a procedure in which at the other end is a human being and involves interpretation, it seems like there's no good quality control at this point.
There actually is good quality control, because as is written in the new law, and I believe that Susan Langmore, who developed this procedure, was asked for her input on this law and then was never followed up with based off the language that she proposed. There is good quality control. When you talk about a verified competent speech language pathologist, that implies that that individual has demonstrated competency by which to train other speech language pathologists.
Is there a test?
Is there a test? No, there is.
There
we
a
have our
certification?
license. Well, for the same reason, we don't have a test for doing modified barium swallows.
But a lot of
So
the
where's
studies
the
show
competency upon doing modified barium swallows?
a lot of inter-rater variability. When we
Right, but that's the
swallow
same that
studies.
exists in the ENT world. I can tell you from experience that I have seen exams that other ENTs have performed in the community, and they've missed or misdiagnosed specific pathologies that have been caught by other ENTs.
Yeah, that happens, but at least there are certifications on boards.
Even though they have a certification, it doesn't mean that their practice is
I know,
effective.
but at least there's certain methods to get there. So at least there's pathways that.
Right, and there are
everybody's
pathways.
going to miss something at one point or another, you know?
Right.
Nobody is perfect. We'll have AI someday, and even AI has biases and problems. But I think for all these things, and as we train people, and training in many instances is a little hodgepodge. Not everybody gets the same skills or same training. Coming up with a way of protecting and certifying. And you guys have great leaders in the field like Susan.
Correct.
And
these people have all taken her training.
Absolutely thrilled if there would be better quality control.
No, we all are in agreement on that. I actually am in direct conversation with Susan Langmore. So what our concern is that we are the verified competent speech language pathologists who are providing the training. These individuals have taken Susan's FEES course, they've taken subsequent courses, and that they're following the ASHA. There's an AJSLP paper that was published by ASHA with a very detailed outline of competency, and we are following those competency standards. So even though we don't have a test, there is an outline for following competency standards. And going back to the original point is that these SLPs who are currently practicing SLPs have taken Susan Langmore's FEES course, have taken subsequent FEES courses. They're following the code of ethics outlined by the ASHA paper. I'm acting as their supervisor on site for their fees examinations, making sure that they are meeting the competency standards set by ASHA. So we have a highly ethical program going on, but now it's been suspended based off this language that's talking about the mechanics of holding a scope, not the quality.
I think that the process of grandfathering in is something that has been incorporated in many facets of healthcare professions, and it's something that we should look into if people have been practicing safely and there's been no complaints, because
correct,
as we come with new regulations, we cannot backtrack and affect the way people have been working. But we could create standards and protections moving forward.
Certainly.
Give a timeline. I agree with you. It would be absurd to suspend and affect people that have been working. What would not be absurd?
No, it's not that they would be. It's that they have been suspended. They are currently suspended.
Excuse me. This is the moderator. We've gone past the 3-minute mark for public comment. So if you have any closing stuff that you want to add in, otherwise we'll go to the next public commenter.
Okay, so right now in this moment, we just want to clarify that any speech pathologists who received their verification under the old language are no longer or are allowed to continue with their programs.
Madam Chair, this is Legal Counsel Ken Swenson. We have wandered off topic, and the current discussion is not germane to the agenda item. I recommend that if you want to take up this subject, it should be the subject of a future agenda item at a future board meeting, because it's not germane to the pending item, and there could be a potential violation of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act if the board engages in colloquy on this subject at this time.
Okay. We can certainly do that. I think when we open for public comment, that's what we're doing, is opening for public comment. And the fact that there is some controversy with this, as is stated in the agenda, would lend itself to some discussion of this issue. But having said that, I believe...
Dr. Rajo, can I also comment? This is Paul Sanchez, and I just want to refer those individuals. As was mentioned earlier, this is already in law, and it was a bill that was written by Senator Ochoa Bowe, and I would refer them to the author and the sponsors of the bill for their concerns, since they're actually looking into this. The board has no control over what's already in law. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. I have another request for public comment from Susanna. And Susanna, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak in a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Now, I definitely don't want to get off topic, but I did want to comment on a statement that was made earlier with regards to putting in a scope and knowing that there's a patient on the other side, which I think as a speech pathologist, we all agree that there's an importance for safeguards and caring for our patients. And as was mentioned by Marissa, that we do receive a lot of training. You know, I had discussed this before when we were analyzing the language of the bill, but with us, because we're getting training by someone who's already been deemed competent to pass the scope, whether it be other SLPs or ENTs or physicians that normally do endoscopy, when we can visualize inserting a scope into the nares the entire time, while you have nurses who are on a daily basis putting in NG tubes blindly without any way of seeing where they're going or that it's properly going into where it should be. So I consider what we're doing a lot safer, and I don't think that they take tests to prove that they can pass an NG safely. I guess I just wanted to have some kind of rebuttal to that statement earlier, with us not really having, that we're not really doing it in a safe way if it's not done with an ENT supervising us. I feel like it would be in the same way that a nurse passes an NG without an ENT being there, and they're being trained by other nurses, and they don't visualize what we do.
All right, this is the moderator. It looks like there's no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Dr. Valdez, I thought I saw your hand up for a moment. Dr. Valdez, did you want to say anything?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. I think the difference between an NG and the fiber optic is the ability to diagnose and interpret. And I think it's putting a scope is much more than putting an NG, in the sense that there's anatomical functions, physiological functions that will be that need to be diagnosed, potential problems that could be, or lesions that could be present that would be diagnosed. So it's much more than an NG, because it does require knowledge and interpretation of a lot of the different things. So it's in that sense, I believe it's a little bit more complex.
Thank you. Gilda?
Yes, I just wanted to reference the general provision section 2530.2 that's referenced in the handout. It does state that under the current, which we are being advised to follow, that a speech pathologist shall pass a flexible fiber optic nasoendoscopic instrument only under the direct authorization of an otolaryngologist certified by the American Board of Otolaryngology and the supervision of a physician and surgeon. I think that's very important to keep in mind. So if there are programs that have deemed speech pathologists competent to pass these scopes and interpret independently, that they should have had the authorization of the otolaryngologist and the supervision of a physician and surgeon. So if that was the case, then that should be considered prior to discontinuing the program. But if these were clearly just speech pathologist to speech pathologist peer trainings without incorporating the authorization or the supervision of a ENT or physician surgeon, then that's a different issue. So I just wanted to include that. So if those programs did include those physicians, then that should be the discussion.
Looking for the moderator to close the public comment, but Heather, do you want to comment on?
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Ms. Dominguez said, as well as address some concerns that were raised by the public. The language was actually looked at based on what ASHA standards are that were mentioned by a commenter. And the ASHA standards do recommend an ENT being involved for the first supervised passes. And so a program is not necessarily suspended if they had the ENT supervision as part of their training. It could have been 10 supervised passes. It could have been all 25 passes supervised by an ENT. If they met or exceeded the standards in the law, then their program is not suspended.
Thank you.
And then I would just suggest, further clarification in whatever bill that the senator brings up this year to clarify, and that Kasha is working with the author, Senator Ochoa. That'll be forthcoming, and we will hear about that soon. I don't know whether or not they'll entertain urgency measures or not, and what that language will look like, but I'm sure we will be informed in the coming months. So.
Thank you. Okay, if there isn't any further board discussion, Heather has a couple of other items to cover in her report.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Raggio. Referencing back to the report in section C, the board sponsored legislation regarding gender neutral language in the Board's Practice Act. We are anticipating that this legislative proposal will be included in the Business and Professions Code Omnibus Bill. The February 17th deadline that I mentioned does not apply to committee omnibus bills, so we are still watching for that to be introduced in the coming weeks. As a reminder, that legislative proposal would remove the gendered pronouns he or she from provisions of state law within the Board's Practice Act. Instead, the proposal would revise the Practice Act with inclusive language by using gender-neutral pronouns or nouns to avoid the use of gendered pronouns. And then we have a few watch bills on the report. The first one is AB 381 regarding teacher credentialing for occupational and physical therapists. This bill would amend the education code to allow occupational therapists and physical therapists to qualify for a health services credential issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Currently, services provided in a school setting by an audiometrist, occupational therapist, or physical therapist are not considered health services. With the changes in this bill, an audiometrist would still not be considered a health service. And then the last bill is SB 259 regarding reports submitted to legislative committees. This bill would require state agencies to post on its website any report submitted to the legislature, such as a study, audit, or report identified in the Legislative Analyst Supplemental Report of the Budget Act. And that concludes my report. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any board questions or discussion on these last two items? Holly?
Yes, I'm curious about the last bill. Sorry, I just moved it on my screen, but the one about physical therapists and occupational therapists in schools. Do you have any idea whether that they would be in a similar situation to speech and language pathologists where they would have an option to be licensed or credentialed?
Yes, that is the goal, for them to be able to get the teacher's license similar to, or the credential from the California teaching credentialing, similar to what the option is for speech therapists.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying.
Yes.
Any other board discussion or questions? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment on these two issues.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Heather, for that detailed report. Much appreciated. Before we go on to, well, we could do the legislative items for a future meeting. We can discuss items of legislation in sufficient detail to determine whether such items should be on a future board meeting agenda and or whether to hold a special meeting of the board to discuss such item pursuant to Government Code Section 11125.4. So can I ask if there are any legislative items for future meetings? Heather, do you have any?
Yes, this is Heather Olivares again. I am still reviewing the over 1,000 bills that were introduced during the last week, but I have a few that we will be bringing to the next board meeting in April. Of course, SB 612 that I mentioned for the fees procedure is currently a spot bill, but hopefully we will have more of an idea of what direction that bill is going to be going in and have some actual language to be discussing at the next meeting. Also, AB 996 was recently introduced, and that is regarding a conflict of interest policy for continuing education courses. And SB 802 was also recently introduced, which would require a timely written notification when an application is denied based on a criminal conviction. And then there were a number of spot bills that I'm also watching to see if any actual language is added into them before we meet in April. And that's all I have for now.
Is there any board discussion on Heather's report of future legislative items?
I have a question. If I were to want to meet with Gilda and possibly Heather and just put some of these bills on the ad hoc committee, would that be breaking Brown Act? Do I have to give a notice or anything like that?
This is Ken Swenson, legal counsel. The Brown Act requires a notification of any meeting. A meeting is described as a meeting of 2 or more members of the board or an advisory committee. So if there are, more than 2. So if there are more than 2 members, then it would have to be noticed and agendized consistent with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act requirements. If it's less, if it's 2 or less members meeting with staff, for instance, then it wouldn't have to be noticed in that way or agendized.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Karen, just so you know, Heather will be reaching out to you regarding a meeting in the interim between this meeting and the April meeting for that ad hoc committee.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Just a practical question, Heather. Are there keywords in these 1,000 bills so that you can pick out ones that are likely to be pertinent, or do you really have to look through every one of them?
We do have keywords that we search for board specific, as far as obviously if anything is introduced saying speech language pathologist or audiologist or hearing aid dispensing, we are able to pick those up. But there are a number that affect all of the boards under DCA, and those aren't always picked up by our keywords that we search for. So that's why I do read through everything that was introduced.
Quite a job.
I like doing it, so it's okay.
Well, that's good. That helps.
I was going to say, you need to ask Paul for a raise.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah. Is there any other board discussion? Seeing none, can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. We only have a couple more agenda items, but I think the next one could be lengthy, so I would like to recommend a recess for 10 minutes. It looks like somebody anticipated that, but the time isn't right.
I'm trying to fix it, but I think Sarah's going to have to do it for me. I'm sorry, Sarah.
Agreement. 10 minutes.
No worries. Well, yeah, one moment. Let me clear that.
I know how to do so much, but not that.
Therese was just so anxious, she jumped the gun.
I was anticipating.
Did you want the return time for 12:22 or sorry, 2:22?
Oh, let's make it 2:25.
Okay.
Meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board, and move on to agenda item 12. I believe Maria Lorenzo is going to give us an update, but I did want to say something first, Maria. It's so exciting to see all the yellow boxes filled for some of these. I'm not sure I ever saw that before, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Rajo. Yes, it's quite exciting at our end as well. Maria with the regulatory report. The first item on the report is the SLIPA supervision requirements. This regulatory proposal is in the public comment period phase and requires review and approval of the board. We have a separate memo for this regulatory proposal. B is the item uniform standards. The board approved regulatory language on August 13th, 2021. This regulatory proposal was submitted to OAL for review on December 29th, 2022. It was approved on February 13th, 2023 and filed with the Secretary of State. These regulations become effective on April 1st, 2023. This proposed change will require the board to use the uniform standards when disciplining substance abusing licensees and incorporate by reference DCA's uniform standards document. Item C is the RPE direct supervision requirements and telesupervision. The board approved revisions to the regulatory language on October 8th, 2021. This regulatory proposal was submitted to OAL for review on December 29, 2022. It was approved on February 13, 2023 and filed with the Secretary of State. These regulations will also become effective on April 1st, 2023. This proposed change will permit RPE telesupervision and establish requirements for the use of telesupervision. D is the examination requirements for hearing aid dispensers and dispensing audiologists. The board approved the regulatory language on May 13, 2022. The board staff are working on preparing the required regulatory documents for DCA pre-review and is working with the DCA Budgets Office to develop the economic and fiscal impact statement. This proposed change will update the practical examination process, describe the written examination process, update the practical examination appeal process, and specify the required hearing aid examination for dispensing audiologists to only the written examination. Item E is the CPD requirements for speech language pathologists and audiologists. The board approved the regulatory language on August 12, 2022. Board staff submitted the required regulatory documents for DCA pre-review on January 31st, 2023, and are working with the DCA legal on preparing the required regulatory documents for initial departmental review. This proposed change will clarify the definition of self-study, increase the number of allowed hours of self-study, and align hearing aid course content with proposed changes to hearing aid dispensers regulations. Item F is the notice to consumers. The board approved regulatory language on February 25th, 2022. The regulatory proposal was submitted to OAL for review on December 23, 2022, and it was approved on February 6, 2023 and filed with the Secretary of State. These regulations become effective on April 1st, 2023. This regulation will require licensees to provide notice that they are licensed and regulated by this board. Item G is the fingerprinting requirements. The board approved regulatory language on May 13th, 2022. Board staff submitted the regulatory documents for DCA pre-review on August 31st, 2022, and are working with the DCA Budgets Office to develop the economic and fiscal impact statement. This proposed change will require licensees who are initially licensed prior to January 1st, 1999, or for whom an electronic fingerprint record does not exist to be fingerprinted as a condition of renewal. Item H is the CE requirements for hearing aid dispensers. The board approved regulatory language on August 12, 2022. Board staff are working on preparing the required regulatory documents for DCA pre-review. The proposed change will increase the number of hours that may be obtained in related or indirect client care courses, permit other opportunities to fulfill CE requirements, and align these regulations with continual professional learning requirements this board has for licensees in the practices of speech language pathology and audiology under Article 11 of Division 13.4. And lastly, we have item I, which is the SLIPA program academic requirements. This regulatory proposal is in the finalizing regulatory package phase and requires review and approval by the board. And we have a separate memo for this regulatory proposal.
Okay, my understanding that you're going to call out a couple of these to talk about more, as you just mentioned. So is there any board discussion of the regulatory report so far? Not seeing any. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment on the report?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. Great, and it looks like we do have a request for comment from Brandon Westbay. And Brandon, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
So I just have a couple of quick questions about, I think it's Section A in terms of SLPA regulation in terms of supervision. I wrote into the board about some written comments regarding the number of assistants that a SLP could supervise, and just trying to get some more clarification. I just think that if we don't get very specific with it, then having up to 6 assistants, even though they might be part-time, is just kind of like a concern to the consumers, because overseeing that many assistants is just, it seems kind of absurd, I guess, really, that in order to try, meaning like trying to keep track of them, make sure that patients or clients are getting the direct care that they need and getting everything that's evidence-based practice. And so that's the only thing I'm kind of concerned about. And whether also clinics or whatever setting the SLP or SLPAs may be practicing in, are they following those strict guidelines in terms of, are they part-time, or are they just given up to 39 hours and considered them part-time, and when they're really full-time and stuff like that? I'm just making sure that the consumers that are getting our services are being protected, and making sure that whoever the SLPA supervisor is, making sure they are able to supervise ethically with, maybe X amount of assistance. That's it.
West Bay, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Maria is actually going to call out that particular legislative item in just a moment.
Okay.
In mind holding your comments further, and it's more appropriate for that discussion, I believe.
Oh, I apologize.
No, you wouldn't have known it was coming up that way.
Okay, thanks.
All right, this is a moderator. We have another request from Andrea Ball. And Andrea, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
This is Andrea Ball, representing the California Speech Language Hearing Association. We want to thank the board and the staff for all the work on all these regulations. I'm just going to speak to two of the items in this agenda item now. First, we've provided public comment, and we are pleased to see the regulatory package on the RPE supervision moving forward, and we urge the board to do really proactive outreach to inform the public and the field about the changes and the effective date of the new regulations, and CASHA will be happy to partner to get the word out to the field. The other package I want to talk about is, I think, the one that's going out for public comment on the SLPA supervision. We did provide some comments in a letter. We will continue to monitor the process and provide ongoing input to the board, and again, appreciate all the work on all of these. We will be looking at other components of this agenda item and providing public comment as the regulations go through the process. Thank you.
Okay, again, I believe Maria is going to be culling out a couple of these issues for a separate discussion, which may be appropriate for you to join again then.
All right, this is the moderator. It appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'd like to turn it back over to Maria to present a further discussion of two items. We're going to take them one at a time, though.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. The first item is 12A, the SLPA supervision requirements. This proposed regulatory change will permit telesupervision, require a higher level of supervision during the first 90 days, require supervisors to have full-time experience before supervising a SLPA, and then permit the supervision of 3 support personnel not to exceed 6 at any time, as well as incorporate by reference a revised supervision form. This item went out to public comment on November 11, 2022, which ended December 27, 2022. The board did not hold public comment, nor was one requested. During that period, the board received 21 written comments, 4 in a support, 15 expressed concerns or recommended changes. 1 inquired on the regulatory process, and 1 was not related to the proposed regulatory changes. We are recommending the board to accommodate some of the written comments, which will require a 50-day period, an additional 15-day public comment period. What's included in the materials is it's just a summaries of the recommended changes. It doesn't include all the responses to the comments, but ones that will initially were needed to be incorporated to the 15-day comments, or as well as some we have also some that we are recommending rejections for the purpose stated in there. Highlighted in the attached proposed modified text are the changes to accommodate those comments that we're recommending. And then additional recommended changes not made to the text pending board discussion. And yeah, I can go down each one of the comments, or if anyone has any questions on any of them particular, I can further elaborate. It's quite of, yes, we went into, we went in detail, making sure that any recommendations presented, we addressed, whether if we're gonna accommodate it or rejected. And so, yeah, I can, if we would like, we can go to the actual text and I could just go line by line of what changes were made and where.
How lengthy is that?
It sounds a little lengthier. It might be.
It would be, I think it'd be a little lengthier to go through each of the comments in there, but I think I could just give a summary of what's in the text, the yellow portions, and kind of give a summary and background on why the change was being made.
That might be helpful.
Okay. So the first change being made is in 1399.17.2 on page 3. And it will be I believe, the second attachment. Yeah, we're looking at the second attachment. So there was a comment regarding the immediate, the first 90 days initial licensure requirement. That immediate supervision might be burdensome, and so it was recommended to change it to direct. And in this case, it was our understanding that the board wished that it was still in person, so that is why we specified that it consists on-site observation and guidance. So that is one of the change we are recommending. Another change we're recommending is in the next section, 1399.170.15, subsection B. We're clarifying that it would be registering a SLIPA assistant. So there was a concern that there wasn't any grandfather clause in there. And so we wanted to clarify that it would be forever for new SLIPA applications starting when this becomes effective. And then on the next page in that same section, but in paragraph 3, we are there was a comment regarding the lack of clarity to this section, and that it states, sites. The comment suggested that it didn't reflect the tele supervision model that is now being proposed by this regulations. So we are suggesting to remove the word sites. That way it's just more general to apply to that telesupervision, telehealth model. The next change is on that same page in 4. It was the same. It's regarding the first 90 days initial licensure. We're making the same change as was what as I previously stated, to change the supervision from immediate to direct, but that it be on-site observation and guidance. The next change that's being suggested, or that was suggested, was in paragraph 5, to change the CE requirement so that it's prior to assuming responsibility of supervision and not the commencement of supervision. So the supervisor would have to complete the course prior to assuming the role of being a supervisor and not with each supervision. The next change is on page 5 in subsection C. We are changing the form. Since we are making modifications to the forms, we have to modify it in the regulatory language. And so that's what the change is happening. In particular, we're also restructuring the naming format of our forms. So that reflects the new naming nomenclature that we'll be using as a board. The next change on page 6, well, it's actually same section, subsection C, also includes a completed form. It finishes on the top of page 6, so that's a copy of the completed form to the SLIPA. And that's just for the purpose of clarity. The next section that's being amended is 1399.170.117. 17. Since we are making changes to the application, we had to make the changes here as well. And so that's the new name and the new the revision dates to be for this month. And then lastly, 1399.170.18. The termination form is outdated, and so we are revising it to reflect the termination form we are using. We are not incorporating a form because it is used for RPE as well, so it's been included in a narrative format.
Any other comments, Maria? Does that conclude?
So that was the changes on the regulatory text. If you want, I can do changes on the application, which is also part of the regulatory package.
Sure, why don't you go over those? It doesn't look like there's very many.
Okay. Yeah, so the next attachment is just changes to reflect, let's see, on that very first page, one of the public comment mentioned about the full-time, part-time, and how the board is going to keep track. We did notice we actually didn't have a spot on the form, so that's what we're adding on the form as Part C, that the supervisor provides us an indication of full-time and part-time status. And this is similar language that is similar to what we have in the RPE application. And then the other changes on the following 2 pages are just reflecting the changes we are making in the regulatory text, since these are just the duties and responsibilities are just verbatim. For the majority of the language is verbatim from the regulatory language.
So you have a number of other documents in here. Those are just reference documents.
Yes. Let's see. The next, yes, for reference is the termination form that's being removed from regulations, and then the termination form that we currently use. And as I mentioned, you can see that it's used for both SLIPA and RPE, and so that's why we're not incorporating it. We're just doing a narrative form. And then the the next items is actually for discussion, since there was a comment regarding the supervision, especially like the initial licensure, but then also supervision beyond the initial licensure. So that's why we included the scope of practice for your reference in the discussion.
Okay, is there any board discussion on these changes?
Maria, did you want to highlight the recommendations for discussion and what it's talking about there? Oh, sorry to interject, Holly.
That's good.
So the recommendation for discussion, we did receive a comment regarding some language to include. And so we're seeking kind of guidance if it's something that the board would like to include. Currently, we're only requiring 20% of supervision of all duties for the first 90 days. It was suggested, the comments suggested to align with ASHA's guidelines, which in their case was, as stated in the first item before the SLIPA begins, that it should, the SLIPA must have first contact. And then another aspect of the ASHA guidelines regarding supervision is that beyond the initial onboarding, there's a minimum ongoing supervision, which happens, a direct supervision at least 90 or 30 to 60 days. The reason why we weren't able to come up with draft language was because they do, especially that second one does need to be clarified. If it's something the board wish, they were just, the language that is being recommended is a little too vague for us to present anything without any board direction.
Holly, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Well, I had two comments. One was regarding the use of, sorry, I'm going to go to the item number, 1399.170.16 about the maximum number of SLPAs that can be supervised. And to Brandon's point about making sure that that's not abused in terms of companies calling their SLPAs part-time when they may just be barely under a full-time. I remember an extensive discussion about that when the board talked about this language, and I thought it was written somewhere, and or at least in the form itself, where we were using our standard of below 30 was part-time, below 30 hours a week. Is that somewhere? Because I don't see that now.
Yes, it's in the first section, 1399.170. It's the last item being defined. Full-time equivalent means at least 30 hours per week.
Oh, it does say that. Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that and going through this. And then, let's see.
Ms. Kaiser, do you think maybe it should say as defined in section 1399.170?
Yeah, so are you talking about, first of all, I want to see where you're saying it's written. You mean on the form, on the supervision form, or which form?
In the regulatory language. It's
the regulatory language, okay.
Mm-hmm. So it's on the second page.
Yeah,
page
I'm looking. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me try to find it. I'm looking at everything electronically instead of a binder, so it's a little harder for me to quickly find what you're talking about. Sorry about that. Let's see. Could someone direct me to where it would be electronically, which page of the document? Does anybody have that?
I'm going to look it up right now for you.
Cherise.
I think it's on are you able to see page numbers? Because it's on the top of page 4 of 7.
Well, I'm just talking.
She's on the PDF, so it's one long document.
I have to look at, there's like 245 pages or something. I have to find everything that way. So
if you're at page 244 of the combined document.
Okay. I'm on 244 now. Okay. So it's
and
on
it
that
should be
page.
Subdivision J, right before the next reg section. Full-time equivalent means at least 30 hours per week.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing it on my page 244, but I believe you. And as long as it's in there, I think I just want to make sure that was very clear. I think, could we also have that in the form itself that they're filling out when you're addressing full-time and part-time?
Maria did add that to the responsibility statement form.
I did. It says
it does
30 to 40 full-time, 15 to 29 part-time.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay.
It's my understanding, actually, do we want to remove that 40? Because I think we kind of wanted to just keep it at 30. If I'm not mistaken, sometimes people work more than 40.
I don't know if that is a problem if they're working more than 40. think it's, I don't know how to respond.
I don't think it is, but you could change it to over 30 hours, but that just is going to take up more space.
Right.
I mean, normally we just put 30 to 40 and then 29 to 15 on our forms. So unless OAL has a concern with that, then I would just leave it.
Gil, did you contribute to this discussion?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. I had one more point I wanted to make, but Gilda, did you want to talk about that, the same point? Because go ahead.
Oh, yes, it's the same point. It's just tagging on. First thing, yeah, I think this form looks great, and I'm glad that you added the hours. This is just a grammatical suggestion. Pursuant to, is that 2 words? Under section 6, part C6. Should that be 2 words? Yes, please indicate whether you will be the supervisor designated as a lead supervisor, and that sentence ends with in their compliance with the requirements pursuant to 16 CCR section 1399.
Are you on the form, Gilda?
It is. Yeah, she's
yes,
on the
I'm
form.
on the form.
I looked at that. It was really hard to tell if it was a space, if the space was missing or not because of the formatting. So I'll take a look at it again and see what we can do.
Because now that it's printed, it looks like 1 word.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then just a thought, I think it's just helpful. Just a suggestion to take or not, but maybe underneath number 7 to put maybe an asterisk referencing that a supervisor, or reminding them a supervisor should not supervise more than 3 FTE, well, full-time equivalent support personnel, just to remind them when they're filling this out. Just a thought. It would be helpful to me to remind me, like, okay, I already have 6. I shouldn't be taking on this additional one. Or, okay, let me calculate. I have 2 full-timers, so now I can take 2 more so it just kind of helps with the calculations. But it's just a suggestion to take or leave.
Can you repeat where you wanted to add that?
Under 7 on the form, part C, supervision, section 7, maybe a little asterisk, just reminding that there is a limitation.
They have it in number 12 is the only reason I say it.
It's on the
next page.
12.
Yeah, I will not supervise.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, I like that. Okay, that's good then. I missed that. I'm sorry.
No worries. I didn't know if maybe we should renumber it then, or if we were mirroring. I can't remember if this mirrors the numbers on.
Yeah, I believe it mirrors the number in the regulations.
The regs. Okay.
That makes sense. Okay.
So my second point was about the aligning with the updated ASHA language for supervision, which is quite different. And I had just learned about it prior to our last board meeting from a faculty member that mentioned it to me. And I think it's worth discussion. It puts, even though it might seem vague in some ways, it's putting more responsibility on the supervisor to make sure that they are really taking responsibility for the caseload in terms of knowing each case, passing all that information onto the SLPA. It does not get into, they remove the 20% for the first 90 days based on a lot of experience they've had looking at the usage and supervision of SLPAs across the country. So anyway, I do think that's worth a discussion for our purposes.
And board staff would really like to for the board to have that discussion, especially considering the board can't promulgate regulations that are so vague that the Office of Administrative Law rejects them. So if we are going to go in a certain direction, we will need to work with legal counsel to make sure anything we adopt or want to adopt, that is from ASHA would have to not be so vague as to be rejected by OAL.
I understand that. And as I say, I think that makes sense. And we have, certainly resources. We have, people from CASHA, Gilda and myself, but, so many people that have experience actually with SLPA. So I guess I'd like to put that on the table as a next step to look at that language and maybe, add to it so it isn't as vague, but really consider making that change.
Maria?
If someone's working, say, 30 hours a week and 20%, that's not like 6 hours. Am I doing that? I mean, is that a challenge for supervision to happen for 6 hours a week for the first 90 days to make sure that the consumer is receiving the services that they are supposed to be getting? And if they're working less hours, that's even less during the week. I don't think 20% is unreasonable.
Maria, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I guess for here, it's what we have for supervision requirements in terms of like hours. We just only have the 20% supervision during the first 90 days. We don't specify anything beyond that, nor do we have specific language regarding first contact. And so that's what's being recommended by ASHA's, aligning with ASHA guidelines is, should the board consider having language about the SLP supervisor always having first contact with the patient? I'm not familiar with practice if it's normal for SLPA to work on new patients before the supervisor meets with them. So yeah, that's one of the items being discussed. And then the second item is minimum ongoing supervision. So like I mentioned, we currently don't have an hours requirement for a specific type of supervision. We don't specify how much direct supervision a SLPA should have or indirect. And so what ASHA has is that minimum ongoing supervision must always include documentation of direct supervision at least every 30 and 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another item for discussion.
And again, if we're gonna get defining it, we need to define it quickly because it's already been noticed with the Office of Administrative Law. And then it needs to not be so vague that minimum ongoing supervision would need to be defined. And it needs to be, it's either at the 30-day or the 60-day or no less than every 60 days. It's got to be clearer if that's going to even be something to entertain.
I'll just speak up. I forget if my hand's up or not, but what I really like about it is that first contact, making sure the supervisor doesn't just supervise at their convenience of, and making sure that the SLPA really has that foundation with each of their clients, each of the patients or students. So, maybe it's even kind of blending some of that language in rather than removing everything we have. And again, I don't want to slow things down to the point that we're going backwards in time. I really don't mean to do that. I just thought that had a lot of value in terms of the quality of the supervision.
I agree with that. And then it's just making sure that obviously that is clearly referenced depending on frequency of visits and sessions and setting. what does that really entail? Is that someone who's been going to be seen 1 time a week versus 2 times a week versus 3 times a week, or daily, 5 times a week? I mean, so who determines, who's going to be determining that? I mean, let me rephrase that. I know the supervisor is going to be determining that, but then are we just giving that, what's the consistency of that decision? That's what I'm trying to say. Where's the consistency?
I think that's dependent on how to determine if it's every 30 or 60 days. So if you're seeing the patient or client or student more often, I think that's where the 30 days would come in. But if you're not seeing them as frequently, then it would be the 60 days or anywhere in between.
You mean ASH's recommendation, Maria, right?
Yes, ASH's guidelines. That's I think that's how you determine whether it's 30s or 60 days. But as Sharice was mentioning, we can't have language that vague. So we have to say if it's either 30, 60 or something different.
Okay.
Or define the criteria that determines the 30 or 60 days. That's where it gets a little difficult. So
yeah, and this is specifically for direct supervision, a minimum of ongoing supervision, direct supervision.
And I'm not trying to indicate it's impossible or that we can't accommodate somehow. I just want to. I just need us to be cognizant of that sort of vague language would have to be pinpointed.
Yes, and I believe we also might have to specify hours of direct supervisions, like numbers of hours.
Yeah, what is minimum ongoing supervision?
Minimum ongoing is very vague as well, if I'm not understanding it. So
then it gets back to probably saying a percentage, because it's, we have such a very a range of how many hours the SLPA might be working. So I just, it'd be hard to give a certain amount of hours, if somebody's part-time, or some SLPA may only have like 3 clients versus another one that has 10 or 15, so.
This item was originally was going to call for a motion, but with all the discussion I'm hearing, it sounds like that may be premature at this point.
So we are in a timeline for this because now it's been noticed and we have a year. If the board is not ready to accommodate the comment, we could hold it as further discussion, reject a comment that, saying that the board will have to look into this a little further and submit it as a different regulatory package. That could be something the board can consider as well.
Alexander, could we get your input on this as well?
Hi, folks. This is Alex Millington. Yeah, I agree generally with what's being said here. Unfortunately, I'm covering for Karen Halbo, so I have to admit that I don't know a lot about the specifics of these regulatory packages. But if you're going to suggest additional changes, generally speaking, if you're not able to make the exact changes here on the record and create a motion that's specifically tailored enough to adequately describe exactly the changes, your options would be to come back another time to consider this matter again with further changed proposed modified text, and then hold a motion at the next meeting, or I think, depending on the nature of the comment request, it could be considered something to be done in a separate rulemaking. But admittedly, I don't know enough about the exact nature of this rulemaking and the nature of the changes that are being requested to tell you which one of those things would be appropriate.
It sounds like then the safest arena is that if the board wants to consider changes in the areas for discussion, that if we're not able to make a motion now, we may want to, if the board is open to it, delegate certain members to work with Maria on language so that at the April meeting, it could be approved, reviewed and approved. And then it just shortens our time frame because again, you have 1 year from when we notice this package. So it has to be finished by November 11th, 2023. So you will get a little closer and there is a whole review process through DCA agency, then to OAL, and OAL has 30 days. So all of that has to occur before November 11th of 2023.
Yeah, and I might add that there's a risk associated with going that route. Which is what Sharice is trying to probably, I'm sure, clearly articulating here.
Yeah, sorry, this is Holly. I believe it would be best to continue on the path we're on. I wanted to have a discussion about it, but with weighing out what our options are, I think the changes would not be worth, the possible changes would not be worth holding up moving forward, because I think that the board was satisfied with this language before. And same way, that's my thought.
And we can always, we've done it with others, the comment can be addressed in a future rulemaking file. I think that's what Alex was mentioning. So that
Yes,
could
that's
be an
correct.
option.
Gilda, do you want to make a comment on do you agree with what Holly said?
I think so. Would it be too much to add in the first contact at this point?
I don't know that it would be too much to include it.
I would.
Or delay it?
Well, it might delay it. My only other concern is how this first contact works in the school setting where supervisors might change often, and whether this could create the kind of problem, unintended consequences, just like changing the statute with the fees and not. So that's my only concern with that, and that might need to be a little more looked at.
Okay. Agreed.
So I'd hate to make like all SLPs, oh, I got a new supervisor. Okay, well, they've got to have first contact. So no, you can't have your session this week. You got to go in just because the supervisor changed. Not that the plan changed or the SLPA changed, but so that's my only concern.
Taken. I do have another question. Is this the time to talk about the activities the SLPA should not engage in?
Is that in
No,
this
that's not
rulemaking?
one
I
of
think
this.
it's not in this package.
Yes, it's not part of this rulemaking.
Okay.
That would definitely be a future rulemaking package. I don't think it's also part of 12I either.
Okay. I did have a
No,
comment
it's
about
not.
that.
It's not an
because
area
it's
we're looking at.
Okay. I asked because it's in one of the sections that we're referencing in ASHA, and I guess I can bring it up later when we're at that section, or if we're not going to talk about that at all.
It would have to be a future agenda item because it's not a section currently as any of our rulemaking packages.
Okay.
I want to say too, Sharice, you made a really good point. I know Gilda agreed with that as well, about the unintended consequences. I hadn't thought about that. And I think that I'm looking at this kind of in terms of best practices, but that's not really what the goal is of writing this. It's not, there's always the ideal of what we can hope people will do, but in practicality, it doesn't make sense to have all of that written in something that we can't enforce, and that may get in the way of people actually getting services. So I agree with what you stated.
And I do generally try to be very cognizant of unintended consequences, but there always can be, and that's the only concern I would have there. And then we can add a future regulatory package to look again at this, the SLPA, the other portions of the SLPA regulation packages.
Madam Chair, this is Attorney Ken Swenson. Your usual General Counsel, Michael Knotes, is joining the call, so I'll leave it now to his very capable hands, and we'll be signing off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your help today. And I saw that Michael signed on. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, thank you for your assistance today, Ken.
Welcome. Keep up the good work, everyone.
Thank you. So if there isn't any further discussion, we do need a motion to approve the modified regulatory text as currently drafted. Are we feeling in a position to do that?
Yes.
Would you like to make a motion to approve the modified regulatory text as currently drafted?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve the current, can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Yes, a modified regulatory text as currently drafted.
Okay, modified regulatory text as currently drafted.
We actually do have a motion language if you would like one of us to read it.
Yes.
Oh, I was looking at the action. Yeah.
It's on the last page of the memo.
If you could read it, Marie, that'd be great.
Okay. Move to approve the proposed modified regulatory text for 16 CCR sections 1399.170, 1399.170.2, and 1399.170.15, and direct staff to take all steps necessary to notice the modified regulatory text and make any non-substantive changes to the regulatory package.
So this is Michael. So we'll need someone to move that and then someone to second that, presuming that's what we want to do.
I forgot to take off my mute. I so move.
I second. Was that Karen?
Yes.
All right, can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. Great, and it looks like we have requests for comment from Brandon Westbay. And Brandon, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for modifying that SLPA responsibility form in terms of putting the FTE and everything in there. I guess, did the motion pass for you guys for those regulatory package to move forward? I guess I'm a little confused at this point.
We haven't voted yet. We're waiting for
Okay. Sorry. I guess the only thing Holly brought up is about the quality of supervision. Just the number of up to 6 just kind of really worries me. In order to make sure that the SLP supervisor is make sure they are aware of each client the SLP is working with and everything. I just don't see how we can, as SLPs, make sure we're ensuring that quality of supervision and overseeing that caseload with so many assistants that we're allowed to supervise up to 6, and just ultimately being the, I guess, case carrier or the person that's responsible for those clients and ensuring that they receive the best practices. So that's just the thing I just kind of worry the most about. And I know that the way it might be written is in terms of, I guess, support personnel. Whereas, so can it be 6 SLPAs at that point, or is kind of like 3 SLPAs and then, I guess, I don't know, 3 aides at that point? That's it.
I think if it's okay, we can clarify that when it does say support personnel, that could mean if they were all part-time, they could be 3 SLPAs and 3 aides. It could be any mixture of those.
This is the moderator. We have another request for public comment from individual identified as Crystal. And Crystal, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak in a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Maria and Heather for proposing telesupervision for speech and language pathologist assistants and RPEs, telehealth services to breach low SES backgrounds and those who are in remote areas. And these bills would further facilitate SLP supervisors in all settings to ensure that supervisees are providing evidence-based quality care. I also wanted to confirm that those support personnel would include RPEs. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears that was our last request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we have a motion before us. In a second, I'd like to have Charisse call the vote.
Yes, sorry, I thought I missed a question in there. Apologies. Dr. Raggio.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser. Mr. Borges.
Aye.
Ms. Chang.
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Dr. Valdez.
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you. All right, Maria, I believe there's one more item under your report that you'd like to you called out to discuss.
Yes, item 12I regarding SLPA program academics requirements. This proposed regulations will specify qualifications for SLPA training program directors, increase the number of fieldwork experience hours, and modify the full-time work experience required for out-of-state SLPA applicants. The 45-day public comment period began November 11th and ended on December 27th, 2022. The board did not hold any hearing, nor was one requested. We received 5 written comment during and after the initial 45-day period. 1 expressed support, 2 expressed concerns or recommended changes. 1 inquired on the regulatory process, and 1 was not related to the proposed changes. The Administrative Procedure Act does not require the board to respond to written comments in support. However, the board is required to respond to written comments that object or make recommendations. And so we have provided you a summary of comments and draft board responses for this item. I do want to highlight the last comment was a recommendation to remove ASHA's a reference to ASHA's 1996 SLPA guidelines. Board staff is recommended to not make changes to accommodate this comment for the reasons as stated in the suggested board response. Essentially, this document is incorporated in a section that is not part of the regulatory process. So to fix that, to make those changes, we'd have to withdraw the package and introduce it with this additional section. And so we're recommending that we will look at it as a different regulatory package of its own. And that's all I have. We do have suggested motion language if we would like to proceed with completing the rulemaking process for this package.
Is there any board discussion regarding this package?
If there's any questions or comments with the board responses, we're welcome. We could make changes to that. This will be part of the final statement of reason that we will be including in the rulemaking file.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand that. So if we make a motion to accept this, and you're saying you can go back and make, is it non-substantive changes?
Yes, you can make changes to the board response if what you see, if you feel it needs to be responded to the comments differently. If not, you can approve them as they're noticed, and we could complete the rulemaking process.
So essentially, Maria's not talking about the regulatory text. She just means our board responses to the comments. And if we want to make changes now before moving on.
Okay, are there any for board members? Seeing none, I was wondering if I could get Maria to read the suggested motion language.
Yes. Move to approve the proposed board responses to comments and direct staff to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, including the filing of the final rulemaking package with the Office of Administrative Law, authorize the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations before completing the rulemaking process, and adopt the proposed regulations as Title 16 CCR sections 1399.170.4, 1399.170.10, and 1399.170.11 as noticed.
Would anybody like to make that motion?
So move.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, can I ask Sharice to call the vote?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. Valdez?
Aye.
Dr. White?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we have a couple more items. Agenda item 13, future agenda items. Can I ask the board members for any future agenda items you'd like to see? Gilda?
Yes, I'd like to request that we revisit the scope of responsibilities of a speech language pathology assistant. Can I state specifically what I'm inquiring about, or should I defer that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Enough so that it helps staff put it on the agenda.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's regarding the section that we currently have regarding the speech language pathology assistant may not perform any of the following functions, and this is pertaining to performing procedures that require a high level of clinical acumen and technical skill. For example, vocal tract prosthesis, shaping or fitting, vocal tract imaging, and oral pharyngeal swallow therapy with bolus material. I wanted to discuss revising that statement, for example, removing the limitation for the swallowing therapy with bolus material. And that would be in line with ASHA. And then the second piece to that is under the opening statement that states that a speech language pathology assistant may not conduct evaluations, interpret data, alter treatment plans, or perform any task without the express knowledge and approval of a supervising speech language pathologist. Looking at that and suggesting or having the conversation to make that in line with ASHA 2 and removing that. And that was it.
Would it be helpful to board staff if Gilda were to write down her?
Thank you. It's been noted.
Do you have enough information?
Yes, we're looking at section 1399.170.3 regarding activities, duties, and functions outside the scope of responsibilities of a SLPA. Thank you.
And Dr. Raggio, were we wanting to delegate that to the practice committee, the SLP practice committee?
Okay. So delegated?
This is Michael. That's up to you, Madam President.
Well, it seems appropriate that they're the experts in this area and should look at that. I'm going to bring up a point here, though, that always kind of bothers me, and that is, and maybe it's not appropriate here, but I thought that we were working toward removing any professional organization's requirements from our statutes and regulations. And if we continually reference ASHA, AAA, whomever, ABA, then I think we're going against that overall goal. So I just wanted to open that up because that was historically a goal to not do that. That doesn't mean we wouldn't mirror what if you think those are reasonable requirements, but that we don't have to say if ASHA says so, then we're going to do it.
I would agree.
Dr. Raggio?
I think with
I
think with my I don't know if that's pertaining to my suggestion per se, but I do think regardless of ASHA, that we should look at the skill set and the limitations or lack of limitations for the assistants, because, for example, for the oral pharyngeal swallowing therapy with bolus material, I think it should be of discussion that they should be considered as personnel who can follow through with the treatment plan, not modify it, not establish it, but follow one that has been established by a speech language pathologist. I reference that only because that's also where our speech language pathologists get certifications. And then to the second point, I think in protection for the consumers, that an assistant should not be the person driving the treatment plan based on an evaluation that they may be allowed to do or interpret data from. So
I apologize for the interruption. Madam President, I think we're in a situation where we need to limit discussion based on the fact that we're off the agenda. We can discuss whether to put the item on the agenda or not, but we can't get too deep into it. I mean, you have to discuss it a little bit, but we can't get too deep into a discussion on the actual issue. So I think we'll look forward to seeing that on the agenda going forward.
Maria, did you want to add to that?
One thing, I was wondering if you're actually talking about organizations that are saying like the last regulatory item I presented, it's an actual ASHA document. Is that what you're referring to?
Not necessarily. It's just that I think throughout the day when it came up, we were referencing this is how ASHA does it. This is what ASHA wants.
Hi, this is Paul. I think the point is well taken, and we can consider that when we talk about these items in the future.
So not an item for a future agenda then, just a consideration.
I think that's the point Dr. Rajo was
Okay.
making, but I'll let her
Got
answer that.
Can I just comment to that, Dr. Rajo? Hello? Can you hear me? Sorry. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that up. I actually didn't know that there had been a previous discussion. I mean, it's come up a couple times, but it's good to know some of the history about that. So thank you.
This is a lot of silence. Are we missing something, or what? Where are we at?
I was going to ask if Dr. Raggio was having microphone issues possibly.
This is the moderator. Dr. Raggio, if you're speaking. Oh, looks like we might have you logged in twice, so I'm going to promote the new one. All right, Dr. Raggio, do you want to unmute and see if the microphone is working now?
Yes, now I can. Sorry,
Okay.
my computer just went dead. Just everything stopped. I had to turn it back on, rejoin the meeting. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry, Maria, you were in mid-sentence when that just went dead. And I don't want to belabor this point. I just want us to be cognizant when we are bringing forth any sort of language, documents, ways of thinking, that we are mindful of using professional organizations to dictate our statutes and regulations. That's all I'll say. Was there any other board discussion on future agenda items?
No, we got worried we lost you, so we're glad to have you back.
Okay. So are there any other future agenda items? Seeing none, can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator. At the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Agenda item 14 is a closed session, but we don't have any cases for discussion. So we won't go into closed session and have no further agenda items. I'd like to thank everybody on the board staff who did yeoman's work to get this board book done. I know you have a lot of competing work that you have to do, but still got this together and did in a comprehensive way that we could follow really well. I'd also like to remind people that our April 27-28 meeting may be a teleconference. And we'll let you know that as soon as we know. So I wish everybody a good weekend, and this meeting is adjourned.